All right. Well, hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, which is a program of men as peacemakers. Together, we are shaping new meanings of masculinity that are authentic, caring, and thoughtful. So, yeah, these conversations help us do a couple of things. Number one, they help us see the inherent dignity of those around us. Number two, they help us learn how to practice collective care and responsibility towards one another, and to do that in a way that acknowledges our wholeness as human beings. So, hello, my name is Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm excited to get into our conversation here today. So, for those who don't know, each month we choose a topic that can help men and masculine folks within our communities identify our own role in creating safe and thriving communities. So, we host two conversations about that month's topic. The first one really focusing on developing a deeper understanding of whatever that topic or issue at hand is. And then during the second conversation of the month, which is today, we talk about practical ways that men and masculine folks can work alongside others to create positive change. So, as a reminder, these conversations are a way for us to come together, to learn new things from different perspectives, as well as demonstrate how we can have these kind of conversations with the people in our own lives. So thanks so much for joining us, whether you're joining us here live on Facebook or on YouTube, or maybe you're tuning in at a later time, listening on our podcast platform. However you are joining us, we're just glad that you're here and glad that you want to connect with us. So this month, if you caught our earlier conversation, our topic of the month has been around values. So, both values as individuals and values of communities, so those collective values. And so, in today's conversation, we're going to be focusing in on those practical ways that we as masculine people can really begin to live into our values within our own communities. So, very excited about this, but before we hop in, I want to give each of my friends here a moment to introduce themselves. So, again, my name is Sean. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm up in Duluth at Men as Peacemakers. I think that's a theme you'll hear. And I'll pass it over to Nick.
Ooh, all right. Good morning. Thank you. Hi, my name is Nick. My pronouns are he, him. I am a youth support specialist at Men as Peacemakers, located in the third floor of the Duluth building.
Hi, I'm Sean Elmquist, the other Sean. I'm also in the building, but we're all in separate places. It's interesting. Um, but I can feel your presence, you know. I'm also at MAP. I have a new title, but I can't remember what it is. Assistant Director of Restorative Practices, maybe. But I have been at MAP for a long time, and a lot of my work has been campus based.
Ooh, congrats on that new title. And yeah, definitely you have been doing that work for a long time. So, yeah, just grateful to be with both of you on our separate floors in the building here. And yeah, for those who are watching or listening, as a reminder, the purpose of our program called the Men and Masculine Folks Network is really to help men and other people who identify with masculinity to understand that we actually do have a really important role to play when it comes to preventing harm and violence and creating safe, thriving communities. And so we know that everyone has influence of some kind. And so the idea is really that us as men and masculine folks, we can use our influence, our gifts and skills and talents to actually create change and to work on these community conditions that we've actually talked about this year as well, to make some positive changes where violence is happening less frequently in our communities. So, yeah, thinking about our topic at hand, I'm gonna throw up our first question here. But actually, yeah, last time we were talking about values that stood out to us that we remembered learning as kids, like growing up, those values that our families or the people around us taught us. And so, for our first question today, when y'all think about the values that you were taught growing up, what did it look like in how you were taught to practice them? And I can go first if y'all want, or anybody feeling like they want to hop in there.
I gotta think. Yeah, I can go, I suppose. Save you some time, started it rolling. How are we taught to practice them? Of course, my background as a teacher and working with youth now, I honestly think about a lot of just like school. Um, Specifically, everyone always had a classroom job. The values that you learned there were organization, being a part of a team. Uh, everyone has that sort of like shared responsibility. Uh, to me, what was always funny though is that no one. There were always like more coveted roles in doing that. So then you also kind of just learned how to like, I don't know, wait your turn for what you want or work hard, because then eventually you'll get to do something else within the classroom. And so I think about school just in general being a place where you learn about different roles and values. Um, Nowadays, those have certainly changed being on the teaching side of it, but it's definitely something where um, I always reflect about a lot of my upbringing. Um, and try to and I think I talked about this in the last conversation. Try to do things that I didn't like when I was a kid for students nowadays, um, and figure out how to best, like, I don't know. I think I'm rambling right now, but I think with the roles in classrooms is where I first learned how to do that, and being rewarded based on how well you did that job.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was actually thinking about I shared last time that a lot of the values I learned about came from like this religious upbringing that I came up in, and so a lot of where we sort of were taught to practice those values was within the church, and so for me, I think the one that comes to mind right now is just the idea of like serving others or having a servant heart or something like that. That was a really big thing that was sort of ingrained in me and my brothers growing up. And that looked like oftentimes like we were just always at the church helping out. My parents were both really involved with like the leadership, and my mom was involved with like youth and kids stuff, and so there were always jobs, and you know, we would show up to things early and help set up chairs and you know, things like that, where it was like if you had an able body you were expected to kind of come and help out with those things. But you know, as I got older, that kind of morphed and looked like stepping into more of like a leadership role as well, like within the youth group, and then you know later in high school and college, it's actually, now that I think about it, probably where I got my like initial organizing skills, because I would organize a lot of get-togethers, youth groups, retreats, things like that within the church, and it was always sort of with this outlook of how can we create space, how can we help others feel welcome and feel valued, and those things. So a lot of in the church for me, practicing those things. And I think the irony of that is that, you know, what we were also taught within the church is that the church is supposed to be serving community as well. And so that didn't happen as frequently. It was mostly like our church folks kind of stayed within the church and we did stuff there, but not as much. Like we weren't a church that was out at like the soup kitchens or helping in homeless shelters or things like that. So that's an interesting thing that I just thought of.
Um, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think I have kind of a similar experience. I think certainly there's values that you just kind of absorb through osmosis within your family and stuff. A lot of that, looking back, is pretty standard kind of Protestant values, the Protestant work ethic. Um, my family definitely placed a lot of value on education, uh, although for me personally, school felt like a sort of prison where they were teaching you how to work in a factory or whatever. Wasn't my favorite thing in the world. Um, in my family and in my church and stuff, I think the main things were like integrity and a lot of like diligence and perseverance and discipline. And I can't really throw shade at it. I mean, those things are really important to me. And really, if I were to be honest, like, I think those are probably like my main core values. My work, like preventing violence, or, I used to work in a school, like, I pretty much always had a job that was sort of like helping the community. And I never really have thought about it that much. It's like I don't do it because it's like I'm like a good person who's like, it's just sort of an expectation that that's what people do. And that's part of how I was raised in the church and also in Boy Scouts, which was a big part of my life. Like, I'm an Eagle Scout. A lot of those values were just like, I mean, and I think they just still actually turn out to be things that kind of drive my life still. I don't necessarily think they're a bad thing. Um, you know.
That's that's really interesting. It just made me think of the Boy Scouts and how they just recently I read that they have changed their name to something like Scouting in America, or something like that. So a more gender neutral kind of thing. So interesting, values shifting all over the place.
I was gonna say, speaking to that school and kind of piggyback off of that, it's like, yeah, you think about it, it is very does seem very factory based. Like here, everyone's kind of going through these are the things that are inherent for society and have been for most, I don't know, grew up in small town Minnesota, pretty similar in terms of like what they do value. And I think about how I was taught and what that looked like to practice those values is definitely like through role modeling. I grew up, I had some really good teachers, and so pretty much anything that they did, I just wanted to emulate. And so when they're discussing like being responsible and always looking out for your classmates or each other, the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. It's mostly because they would state that expectation in school, but then they themselves would model it, and then you would see that in the community. And I think additionally, if I had to go back to my childhood, um, pop culture, movies. I don't know. There's this podcast I've listened to that's called Raised by TV, and it's parts of it because it's like, yeah, I credit my humor to The Simpsons. I credit my love of life and exploration to SpongeBob and just all these different traits that you see that are popular or like funny or like things that are brought up in other circles within school, outside of school, when you're a kid, your friend groups, and you always just want to like be those things. And I feel like that was something that, yeah, I mean, I guess you can't try to be funny. I just am, but all these other things where it's just like you practice what you see. And to me, that played a big part just because I felt like, I don't know, it was the pre generation to iPad kids where it's like ours was a TV screen. And not that my parents didn't do a good job raising me, it's just I look to the more fun aspects of what like are is valuable um, in that regard.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about like the modeling part. Like we pay attention to those around us who are um, acting however they're acting or living their values out in whatever way. And it also made me think too, and I think maybe this came up a little bit last time too, but just like how the values I was taught were also like super gendered. Like there's some like main overarching ones, right? Like, you know, golden rule kind of thing, or, you know, be kind, compassionate to people. But, you know, for me, growing up and being socialized female, it was like there was so much more influence or man, I'm blanking on the word, emphasis, there we go, on me learning how to be like this caring person who was like behind the scenes, always sort of helping and serving in these different roles. But there was like, you know, those feminine attributes of like care, and women are supposed to be taking care of the children and those types of things, while you know, the men around me and like my brothers growing up, there was just a really different expectation. And so it makes me think about actually this quote that just came out, I think, on our Men as Peacemakers social media, that Felix said in our last conversation, of just always having to grow and shift and like reflect on these things that I think, as you said, Sean, they're just all sort of really ingrained in us, and it's kind of weird to try to, you know, think through them, what they were, how they've shifted, like, and then also maybe like recognizing things in myself through these conversations of like, oh crap, like that's another thing that actually doesn't fit within my values, or this is a habit or thing that I do that I've now noticed or someone has pointed out, and I'm like, oh yeah, that doesn't fit within these values that I hold today. And so having to make those shifts and changes in our actions and behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting. Like, you know, there's the values that you're sort of indoctrinated into, and then there's the ones that emerge through experience, you know, over the course of your life. And there's also just the values that you know, if you get to a certain age, it's like you can look back at a few times when you definitely didn't live up to either set of values. And I think it makes you realize how important it is to have values. Like some of the things where it's just like, you know, this is just Scandinavian Protestant work ethic. Like this is just a shame-based, guilt-based sort of structure. When I was younger, I was very much like, I still am like very, very, very skeptical, and you know, I'm very suspicious of all structures, and I'm always like doing this endless critique. Pretty exhausting, honestly. But I just was like, well, this is all just like a construct that uses guilt to keep people in their place. And um, now I'm sort of like, oh yeah, like it's really important to have, you know, values and ethics, and you know, it's a collective thing. It's not just individual choice. Now I'm sort of like, oh yeah, how would we socially reproduce these things over time? Like, oh, maybe you don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like some of these structures are maybe kind of important, because you can see people who've just like lived completely without any of those structures. Like you just destroy all structures and then you just are year zero. Do you just start from scratch? It's not necessarily a great thing all the time. Even though as a young revolutionary, it's what I was always railing on about. You get older and you get a little more reactionary, and you're like, maybe we should keep some of this stuff. You know, like work ethic. It's like if nobody has a work ethic, like not a lot gets done. It's very corny and sort of boomerish to say, but it's also totally that's real. So I don't know.
Boomerish. I like that. Sean, you're not a boomer, are you? Are you like a millennial or Gen Xer?
I'm definitely not a boomer. I think I'm like right at the very end of Gen X. I might be like the last Gen Xer. I was born
The
in
last.
1979, so
Right on.
yeah.
Well, and like as you were sharing there, Sean, too, I was thinking about how oftentimes I've heard you talk about, like in your work on campuses, like the idea of creating social contracts. And I was just thinking, is that like creating shared values, basically? I mean, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about what that means, but yeah, I was just like, wow, if we're creating social contracts, that actually does seem like it's really connected to this conversation about values.
Yeah, so in the campus, the work that we do around party culture on campuses, yeah, the whole thing starts with a values kind of assessment. Like, what are our collective values? What are our individual values? What is important to us? And um, yeah, the the whole thing has been structured around that for a long time. Um, yeah, we definitely ask what the values are. I've done a values activity like, what are your values? We have different ways of drawing this out, and then we collect them on a sheet of paper and be like, can we agree on these as collective values? Um, I think I started doing it in our restorative justice circles, and then I think I brought it into the campus stuff. I don't, but I do it in almost everything I do. But every time I've done it hundreds of times at this point, and everyone kind of has the same values. So there's that. But I think
We
it's good to remind ourselves of them, and it's just a good way to ground things. Almost nobody is like, my values are self-preservation. Um, you know, so uh, it's a good starting place to be like, okay, we we actually care about our collective well-being. So starting from there, how do we set up parties that actually reflect those values? Because it's very easy to just be like, well, make the party be optimally fun for us. Let's set up the party so that I can potentially get laid. I mean, you can't blame young people for thinking like that. It's like with kids, like they're like, how can I get candy? It's like, okay, yeah, like that makes sense. But these values and these sort of like deeply held, collective um, ideas and ways of organizing ourselves, are there to sort of make you be like, well, we can't all just act in our self-interest. Um, and I think a lot of people are just like, well, there's not a lot of inflection points. Like if my family member is sick, then I can go send them flowers or like show up. And then, that's how I'll live my values. But when I'm here and on campus or like doing a consumer experience, when I'm interacting with my DoorDash driver, that doesn't count. And this is just a transaction. And in the world of transactions, I'm just like a sort of, you know, my values are dictated by the algorithm. Um, it's good to like be like shake people and be like, okay, stop doing that. Like, stop doing that. You have to like be impeccable with your values, actually. And especially with college students, it's like, I never condescend to them and I take them very seriously, but I definitely don't view them as like children. I view them as adults. Like it's, when you're an adult, like you have to take some responsibility. This might be a reflection of my own Calvinist values, but I think it's good to take people seriously. I don't know. You know what I mean?
I was going to say we lost Nick, and I think he was about to chime in. Oh, there we go. You're back.
I'm
I
back.
was going to say we lost you right as you were about to share something. Go for it.
I know, honestly, I was like, maybe that's a good reason to shut up or something. But here I am, perfect timing. No, I was gonna say, That's honestly one of the things that we do within the first week of school. Is it's most nowadays classrooms, we start off with a social contract. Uh, what do you guys agree? What should be the rules? And it's always funny because sometimes you'll be like, I try to phrase it as like, if you were the teacher, what would it look like? And they're always just like, no homework, recess all day and stuff. Where it's just like, I don't know. Yeah, man, me too. Like I'd like that. Less grading for me, easy. Less having to lesson plan, perfect. But it is that kind of inherent as I've gotten older to realize, yeah, organization in a sense works. And the biggest thing I think out of that, and I'm sure that can help lead into the next questions, is the sense of ownership that people get when their values are talked about and when their values are brought up into like, oh, we're actually going to consider that. Because my biggest thing is like, I don't say, "Oh, well, we can't do we can't do recess all day. We can't have like snacks or something like every day, like these absurd ideas." Because it's like, well, let's talk about why we can't, or let's talk about what we could do to get there. And so there's always this sense of like people are heard, people's ideas maybe get added to this social contract, and it's just something that moving forward, like it makes them really feel a part of it, that sense of belonging, but then that ownership, like they they then adhere to these rules because they think back, oh yeah, that's right, I said that I wouldn't do that because either I came up with this expectation or my friend did or someone who I look up to or someone who has this, I don't know, sense of why I would listen to them aspect. So
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nick. Because yeah, I think you're right. It does lead us, and we're sort of organically the conversation is already moving in that direction. But I think one of the things that I've learned, and a lot of us here have learned from the work that we do in community, is that when we as humans are actually living out our values, that actually allows everyone around us within the community to thrive, especially when our values are like those collective values are like designed to uplift the well-being of all people within the community. And so I am curious, let's pop up this next question. So then, what does it look like for you, each of you, myself too, and a question for all of our viewers too. So what does it look like for you to live out or practice these values now as a man or masculine identifying person?
I can jump into it. I also don't know if I froze there, so I didn't know if I was talking over anyone. But to me, I would say the biggest difference in what I thought was like living out to these values and now is like just having that daily awareness. One, what my values are. Shout out to my therapist across the street and down a block for helping me realize what those are. And it's something that has definitely changed my like daily conversation with myself, is like, what are my values, and framing a lot of decisions of like, am I making an emotional decision, am I making a wise decision, does it come together somewhere, and does it adhere to what I do as myself. Like, I don't know, I think the biggest thing you can think about that is a diet. It's like I can't say I'm a vegetarian if I go to Coney Island every day. I can't say that I'm a peacemaker if I'm saying mean things or doing mean things. And so sometimes it's tough because I'm maybe overtly hyper vigilant on what I'm saying and what I'm doing. And I can't just honestly, like even on these conversations, I always overanalyze my words to make sure I'm adhering to what my values are. But I think having that daily awareness makes it more normalized, at least to what my values are, and realizing that I appreciate connection. I um, believe in equity and inclusion. Um, and I don't know, I set goals for myself, and that kind of helps too, to be able to like write down what I want and what I want to live to. That's so honestly like how I ended up at MAP, is that I was working in the schools and realizing that a lot of the reasons why I got into it aren't as part of the job, and what I liked about it wasn't really existing in what it turned out to be. And so then it's like, I didn't have this, I didn't have much. I just know I wanted to do something where I could adhere to making community a better place. And so that's why I'm even here in this conversation right now. Woo!
Woo! Also, yeah, I feel like I can relate to that as well, just because I think when I came to work here at Menace Peacemakers, and I've shared this a bunch of times, but it was like early on in my transition, and a lot of what I was thinking about now that I think back, it's like I was trying to get clear on what were my values, how did I need them to shift or change, and like just thinking about like what kind of a guy do I want to be, what kind of a friend and community member, neighbor, and I think oftentimes we don't. I don't know. I think like the average person doing the 9 to 5 and then trying to take care of families and all of the things, we're all so busy constantly. Like it's just the way that our society, our country runs right now, I think, is this machine. And we're all just supposed to like wake up and do the same thing over and over and barely surviving through it, you know? And so it doesn't leave a lot of like room and space for folks to be able to be like, yeah, what are my values? Let me take some time to reflect on that. Am I acting them out? Am I, where am I? So like I feel very grateful for this job and being here where we do get like a ton of time and space to really get clear on those things for us as individuals, and then thinking about how they actually factor into the work that we do, whether it's working with youth or on campuses or engaging men and masculine people, whichever way. But I think for me, I think the biggest area right now in my life where I'm like really honed in and trying to like pay attention to how I'm acting is as in my role as a dad to my kid. I'm a single dad, and I have her 50% of the time, and so it's you always want to be with your kids more, but so like I'm always trying to maximize that time when I'm with her, and thinking about what are these fun things we can do, and what are the things that I want her to learn, and what values am I really talking about a lot with her, and it's in this moment I'm like, man, I want to get even more clear on that, because there's certain things that I say a lot to her where I'm trying to remind her that she is a good, kind kid, through whichever activities or things that come up in her life, our life, the hard things, and just yeah, just I think one of the biggest values is like I want her to feel cared for, and I think that extends beyond her. I think that extends from within me to every person that's in my circle. I was gonna say in my community. I don't know if I'm there yet. Like honestly. There are still moments where I'll run into someone on the street, stranger, and I think, oh, I don't want to talk to you. Or, like there's these ways where I see it and I'm like, yeah, I'm not actually doing a great job trying to see this sort of inherent dignity and belonging and wholeness in all of the people around me. So there's always work to be done, I think, there. But yeah, this idea of collective care just keeps coming up for me. And what does that look like? How do I accept care? How do I give care to those in my life without just trying to like fix all of their problems? Because actually, I can't fix any of the problems. So that's me.
I think that the biggest thing that I'm noticing about like my role as a I was never very comfortable with masculinity when I was a kid. It always felt like kind of a war zone. Um, yeah, I don't know. I've gone through my different stages, but now I'm kind of like, okay, well, everyone, including like, my kids, just like view me as a big man. It doesn't matter how I see myself. They're like, it's a big, tall man. Is he grumpy? Is he happy? And just see how like I just take up more space than I really want to. And there's really nothing I can do about it. I can't just shrink myself down, which has been my strategy in the past. So part of it is like stepping into like, this is who I am. It doesn't matter who I want to be. At some point, you just have to stop looking through a distorted kind of lens at yourself and just be like, all right, you need to get some self awareness. And then you might not like what you see, but that's where you're at. So there's that. But then also when we're talking about values, like, there's just so much, like when I talk about that kind of Protestant moralizing and guilt, it's like your values aren't just like you acting out in the ways that are sanctioned and conditioned by the material conditions, your class, the society you're in, your family expectations. That's just you playing out your software. It's very bug-like behavior, honestly. And it's functional. And sometimes it's like you just got to go with the flow. You can't swim upstream every second of your life. But I think when values really come into play is when you have to actually like do a hard thing. When you have to actually like not just do what you want or what is the path of least resistance. And so like with kids, I mean, there's like a billion opportunities for this, right? Because it's like, well, I'd prefer to just do whatever I want. But kids, you really maybe sometimes for the first time in your life have to actually like live for someone besides yourself. And it changes everything, right? So, I mean, at least for me, it's, having my stepkids, which are like, my kids, because I don't have any biological children. So I just live for them. I mean, everything I do is for them. And it puts all the energy I put into myself and, sort of what I thought my values were, it puts it into perspective sharply. And yeah, I think like in some ways, like it's an opportunity for your values to really manifest. Like when we're doing this with young people, like I mentioned, like they might not feel like there's a lot of inflection points for them to actually live out their values. People will be like, I value travel and adventure, but you only, get to do that like once a year or once every 5 years if you're lucky. Some people never get to do it. And so like, yeah, it's an abstract concept. But sometimes when like rubber meets the road or whatever, and like with kids and when you're working with young people and just like in the community, like I'm a man who's a man as peacemaker. Actually, I'm not just a regular guy. I'm like a noble community oriented person who actually helps people. Not like when I've worked here for like 16 years. I mean, for the first, I mean, whatever. I don't want to like completely like, but there definitely were lots of times where I was not acting impeccably. And I remember people would be like, oh yeah, men as peacemakers, really? And it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah. And I'd just be like, it's so annoying that people know I have this job. Why can't I just be a bad person? Just let me just, but I don't know. It's just like having that structure and having that responsibility just sort of always looming there. I think in some ways it was just waiting for its opportunity to like allow me to finally like step into my role as a, yeah, people are watching your behavior. In some ways, sometimes the best way you can show your values is just to behave, just realize that and then act accordingly, right? My new thing is I'm trying to swear less. Very challenging.
You don't want to do it right now on air. No, that's fine. I'll be a better role model. No, I mean that's even something I think about, like as a man, kind of in my role as like a teacher, someone that the kids look up to, either because I'm a male in a non-male centric profession in terms of going to schools. Most of my coworkers were female mothers, femme folk, and that's something that I think with the awareness that I was talking about earlier, I always realize what that looks like being in these circles. Sometimes that means I have to bring up a different perspective. Sometimes I remind myself often, just Nick, you're the only man here, shut up. Sometimes what you have to say isn't necessarily what people need to hear because your experience is different than theirs. And so recognizing when that's my role in those places, but then also sometimes, like, I don't know how many times I've either heard it from parents, caretakers at school, or anything like youth related, being like, wow, it's so good to have a male role model at such and so in place because we don't get those that often. And it's like, well, you know, it puts pressure on it, I guess, because now it's in my head when people say that to like adhere to the whatever their idea of a good male role model looks like. But then it's mostly just like, well, if that's what I need to be, how can I best attend to that with my own values still intact? And so I always try to be aware of like I'm doing good behavior, bad behavior. Not a certified in-house bad boy, but like Sean E. But you know what? I sometimes think about that too. It's just like always being aware of like who's watching, what I'm doing, but then keeping myself at the forefront of that. So living out those values as a man, you know, just aware of like who I'm talking to and what I'm saying a lot more than I was. Gosh, even before I became a peacemaker.
Yeah. Oof. And I'm going to shift us to our final question here. But one of the things I was just thinking too is like, how much do we as men and masculine people value the women and femme folks? And how do we live that out? Like, how do we, because when I think about the typical sort of man box, the stereotypical way that boys are brought up, and, everything is supposed to, distance themselves from femininity and what people would define as feminine behaviors, or even clothing and colors. I mean, there's just so much that I think maybe that's another conversation, but like, how do we, like, what does it look like for us to be valuing the women and femme folks in our lives who I think just have consistently throughout from the dawn of history have really been holding so much of our communities and families through harm and violence, and while they're actively experiencing those things too. And so that was just a random thought that popped into my brain. But so shifting from, and we've already sort of been touching on this, but trying to move us from like thinking about those individual values now to collective or community values. This is sort of a two-parter, but like, can y'all, or would you be willing to share a story of a time when you saw your community come together in care for one another? And then what values were being practiced through that? What did you notice? And then how did it contribute to thriving and well-being of everyone around you?
I can start with something, at least it's fresh on my mind. Um, what was it 2 days ago? Duluth had a vote on a school referendum, everyone's favorite thing to talk about. And it was interesting just because again it's being in these circles where sometimes you're having conversations with people you didn't think you'd be talking about. Should we give the school money? Inherently you think, oh, it's a great idea. Let's That's what, yeah. I don't want to get political. I don't want people to be, oh, well, I believe this, I believe that. It was just something that I first thought of because it did bring people together. It's something that whether people got the vote they wanted or didn't, I think it's cool because it brings discourse and it considers the well-being of the community when you have something in terms of like a tax raise and millions of dollars being spent, because then people talk about the values of like education, and specifically this one, how much do we value technology and what that can provide opportunity wise for students in our future. And so regardless of how it turned out for whoever wanted what, I just thought it was really cool to see people talking about it, because I feel like politics can, yeah, be so divisive, but this one at a community level, it's cool to see people get active, to consider about the students, and really, if anything, hear from voices that you typically don't hear. And I don't know, I talk to a lot of people. It changed my viewpoint, where it's just like, oh, my teacher, you always vote with the school, or but then you start to listen to other people and they always bring up good, I don't know, for as dumbed down as I think politics have gotten for the last God, I would even say like 10 years, I would definitely say it's put me in more conversations with people where I'm learning something new, or I'm hearing different perspectives. um does it always look out for the general well-being of the community of Duluth or where I'm at? Not always, but I think the the, the intent is there. It's always geared towards that, and I would definitely say it's centered around like communication, um, less behind a keyboard, more face to face, or even just like, going to public spaces and finding out what people think.
We talk about, at least in this work, we talk about like intact communities or um, yeah, I mean, I think a big part of this work, um, as a reflection of community values and trying to figure out what those community values might be or what that even means, that sort of continues to evolve as kind of the main focus of all of it for me, because I certainly do not feel like I'm part of an intact community. The like mainstream white community or the arts community that I come from has very little cross pollination with any other communities. It's incredibly siloed. Um, and I'm not really sure how, as an individual, how to like address that. So I'm here at Menace Peacemakers, and like I feel grateful that this can be a kind of nexus for some cross pollination between different communities. I'm grateful for whatever part of that I can, benefit from or be a part of. But in my own life, I don't know. I feel like people have never been more atomized or isolated from each other as far as like a collective community. It's interesting because, this sort of secular liberal society of kind of mainstream white folks, it's like if you get rid of church, what is the organizing principle that brings people together? And it appears like for a lot of folks, it's like a cause, like a political cause, or maybe even like a hobby. I don't know. I don't know. Um, and it might just be my own habits of kind of holding myself apart. But I also get this when I work with college students, this general sense that there's just sort of a less of a cohesive collective experience, and that people are more focused on kind of like hyper specialization or like very, very small groups of affinity. And there's less kind of shared collective experience. There's in my lifetime, a rapid shrinking of publicly held space and, the commons, places where people hang out. That's just increasing. And that's the thing I think about a lot. And I don't know what the answer is at all. And in fact, I like know less and less. I become more and more sort of like bewildered. But that's something I'm trying to focus on and think about how we can kind of find a way back to some collectively held values that could help shape the direction of our community, as opposed to just like uh, entrepreneurship, chamber of commerce, like, which seems mostly like what drives things. It's like if you start a business with a bank loan, you're like a community leader, and I don't. This is what you get if that's what your community is made out of. Not to be political, but I just don't really like the direction that's going in. So that's where I'm at.
Got all the hot takes on this recording today. Here for it. I was gonna say one thing. So I'm still newer to Duluth in the area. I come from smaller communities, I guess I would say. One thing to me that was really cool, that wasn't last week, but the week before, is Duluth had their homegrown music. I'm gonna call it a gathering. Just like a bunch of people coming from out of town, a bunch of people from in town. But I guess where I saw the community come together is that I knew all these people from these different sectors of Duluth that I've met either from part-time jobs I've had, from various circles of like different activities, or even just like someone I met through somewhere else. And it's just like when I went to Homegrown last week, I went to a couple different venues, and it was just funny to see like people that I either knew that were into music that I had never heard of, or people that were in bands that I was like, I didn't know you had these talents. And so me, I guess that was something that I guess it's definitely, now that it's been ongoing for so many years before I ever got here, to me it was something that's just like it's still bringing people together. um I stuck around for music that I don't typically even listen to, but I was like, it was just cool to like look around and be like, I don't think I would be in a space with these people if not for this social event, this musical gathering. So that was something else that I thought about in the recent last couple weeks that I would say is like, yeah, community came together. It was cool. Um, yeah.
Definitely. Man, and for me, the thing that came to mind immediately is in June, it's going to be the, gosh, 8-year, I think, anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting down in Florida. And I was thinking about, man, how communities respond after violence has happened. I feel like that is sort of the big one that I've noticed over the years. I mean, folks coming out and rallying and holding vigils and things like that when violence happens, within the LGBT plus community. And just trying to hold each other through those hard things and help folks know that they do have a place where they belong and they don't have to feel isolated or alone in those, hard feelings of fear and sadness and mourning and grief. And then on the other end of that, I think about here in town, our community plans an event called Trans Joy Fest, which is coming up, which is also sort of derived from like a place of pain. Like the idea came because trans folks in this area and all over experience so much violence and discrimination and all of those things. And so the idea was, let's create a space that really can center our joy and bring people together in a way where we can connect, where we can meet people in our community, where we can see all of the talents and the creativity and beauty that people in our community bring. And so I think in my organizer heart, those are the things that I've noticed is like through the hard things and pain, I really see community come together to care for one another through those things. And then also I'm seeing more and more of that where we're trying to just build more and more safe spaces where we can be together and can learn from one another and laugh together and cry together when needed too. So those were what came up for me, and I know we're coming up on our end of the conversation, and so I just want to thank you, Sean and Nick, for what you shared here today and your stories and thoughts, and also for all of you who've joined us or are watching this after the fact. We are just always grateful to connect with more and more of you. So, as a reminder, we typically host these conversations every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. However, our next one will be in June, so join us for that live conversation on Thursday, June 13th at 12 p.m. Central Time. And the topic we'll be digging into in June is around inherent dignity and belonging. And what the heck does that mean? So join us for that. We'd love to see you there and engage with you in those conversations. And so don't forget, you can follow us on all the social medias, stay connected with the Men and Masculine Folks Network on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube. You can listen in podcast form now to some of our older conversations on Spotify or Podbean. So that would be awesome to engage with us in those ways. And if you happen to be watching this conversation as part of your virtual training for the Don't Buy It project, check the description below for instructions about downloading that discussion and activity guide. And as always, we encourage you to have conversations like this with the people in your lives. What are your values? What are those shared values that you have with the people who are in your life? And it's through those conversations and the connections that we're building communities that are free from violence, where every one of us can thrive. So, thank you again for joining us here at the kitchen table, and we'll see y'all next time.